Welcome to another episode of GQ Speaks, your go-to platform for insightful conversations, captivating stories, and thought-provoking discussions. GQ is a series of experiences, and we're just making sense of that as we go along. That is what we're doing here, one conversation at a time. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into our episode.
Okay, hello. Very nice to be here with you, Bimba. I'm delighted to be able to ask you some of the burning questions I have about your book and its general background.
Well, thank you very much for coming here with me, for giving me your time and taking my time as well.
As you can see, I've come armed with notes and a whole selection of different questions. I want to start from something that many other people might be interested in as well. So it's quite unusual for someone your age, with due respect, to write a book. So what prompted you? What impetus was driving you at the time when you decided to write it?
Well, I've been a man of literature ever since I was 8 or 9, right? I have always been interested in literary texts that are often associated with civil war, often associated with Nepali politics. And I had always heard stories related to Nepalese civil war. As I went on, I felt like I had to write something because there are a lot of people who are still left voiceless, a lot of people who still have no hopes, who have lost a lot of things due to the war. So I thought, if I know these things, why not write something for them, even though it might not be successful? But why not try?
Well, I think it is successful because obviously it opens up a whole new area for exploration for people who don't know much about Nepal, such as me. Before reading this book, I didn't really know much about Nepalese history. But you write in your admirable desire to give voice to people who have been silenced somehow. But this war is now the past, it's history. So what makes it relevant to you or to others at this point in time?
Well, a lot of promises were made, right?
Yeah.
This war started around 1995. A lot of promises were made by the Maoist, by the monarch. Well, the monarch is not there anymore, but a lot of promises were made to these people. The Maoists came and sold us promises of a greater Nepal. I mean, we have a better Nepal, yes. The people of that region have... Nepal finally got to know what equity is, because Nepal did not know what these things meant before that. There was nothing like that. So yes, these people got something, but they lost a lot of things as well. People often associate the hills and mountains with Switzerland. So a promise was made to make Nepal not just a great country in South Asia, but one of the best countries in the world. And the word Switzerland was used again and again. And this promise has never been fulfilled. But if you look at Eastern Nepal and Western Nepal, it's like sky and Mariana Trench. That much of a difference in development still.
So that's a pretty dramatic comparison, really. And the discrepancy is that deep?
Well, the people who've lived in Western Nepal and who've seen the situation, who've heard the stories of all the three sides, the Maoists, the military and the monarch, these three sides will tell you that there are discrepancies. But then, of course, people tend to be biased and they do not tell you the whole story.
Yeah, of course. They see things through the perspective of their own experience. So there are still divisions within Nepal itself. You also write about divisions not just in purely economic or political terms, but also social terms. You talk about this system of caste, and I'm wondering just how important are these divisions still in Nepal? Did they play a role in other conflicts or protests in Nepal? For example, in the latest one? No.
The caste system has existed from the past, but it's not even relevant. I mean, more or less not related. What was related was the people who did not have that many rights, who had no voice at all, who had always been suppressed. We cannot use the word slavery, but there was even a form of slavery until 2001. So caste has no role, but social conditions, economic conditions have a huge role in the civil war. And talking about the recent conflict, recent revolution, it is more related to corruption by the higher officials who have been there for 35 years. Yeah. I cannot tell what will happen now. All we can do is hope. But these tensions still somehow, these things play a huge role. Yeah.
So there is definitely hope in your view, because your book is essentially tragic in tone and it ends on a fairly hopeless note. In fact, there's a death of hope, in fact. And so I want to ask you whether your view of Nepal has changed since writing this book. Obviously, the word revolution is quite powerful and it implies some drastic change. So do you have hope for that change, and you didn't have it when you were writing a book?
Well, I have hope, yes. But if we continue, the Nepalese people continue worshipping people like their gods or something, I don't think there will be any change.
So the theme of Switzerland as this shining example of political perfection keeps coming back without any tangible result.
Even now, if we still continue worshipping those people, right? They're politicians. They're not gods. They're not your fathers or mothers who gave you everything. Their job is to do politics. It's bare minimum that they sit back, shut up and do their job, do the rightful job. It's not a big deal that they'll do good things. Our political standard is so down in gutters that the interim prime minister announced that there are going to be rainfalls, so stay safe. And we praise that. Oh my God, she's such a wonderful lady. It is her job. And even now, the new politicians who are in the elections, I've seen a lot of people who are worshipping them. And in some places, there's not even a safe space for you to criticize them. If you criticize them, you're going to be called Zholes. So Zhole are the people who blindly follow something, in this context, the old political parties, who blindly follow something without any reason, and they don't even criticize when their party does something bad. If you continue being the slaves of these people, like we used to be of the monarch, of Congress, of UML, of Maoist party, Nepal is not going anywhere. But if we do the rightful thing, that is, first letting them do their job, and if they do not do their jobs, grab them by the neck, shove them to the ground, and tell them that you did wrong. Get out of here. We need new people. If we keep on repeating and keep on worshipping those people, we're not going anywhere. But if we learn to think, if we learn to be critical, if we learn to look at their policies and tell what is wrong and what is right, if we start being the rulers of ourselves, then I think we have hope.
I'm really impressed, and I can see several emerging strands of thinking here. So on the one hand, you're absolutely right in calling for people to stop being blind followers of any given ideology, because initially I thought you were going to speak just against the monarchy, but obviously you have spoken against other political entities and ideologues as well. None of them is in any way comprehensive, and they should all be checked against reason, against common sense, against their usefulness for people living under that kind of form of governance. I think all over the world, perhaps, we should wish for a more rational, more calm approach to politics. And another thing that is very interesting in what you've just said is that kind of practical dimension of politics, that politicians should be doing their job in terms of making life better for their constituents. And I think this gives me hope as an outsider that young people like yourself will be able to perhaps change the course of politics and development in countries like Nepal. But your characters in the book, so I'll go back to the book now. What struck me about the book was this very clear, tragic tone. And I was wondering how you went about creating the characters and mapping out the plot, the development of action, so that it ended up on such a dark note, and whether at any point in the writing of the book, was it your initial intention that you brought to the final fruition by ending the book in the way that you ended it?
Well, before I started the book, what I knew was I'd start with being kicked by my father, and I would end the book with this one line. Well, initially it was supposed to be written in Nepali, so it had a different line, but when I translated it to English, I knew that I'd end it with people were stabbed by the very gods they worship. When I started writing the book, I knew that I had to present the character in such a way that people will actually try to know what happened. People will actually feel what happened and not just brush it off like another book based on tragedy. So that is why I use the character of I, because I believe as a writer, when there's a personal narrative, you're actually more drawn towards it rather than a third person narrative. Like, it creates a different kind of tone, right? So first of all, that is it. And I was thinking of characters. I was thinking of a character of my friend, and guess what? I had a friend right in front of me. The character of Dilip is actually a real character in my life as well. We studied together. Matter of fact, we have the same birthdays, right? And he was that funny character who was never afraid to fight. So I thought, why not? Why not this character? And about the tone, well, to give justice to people, first of all, you need to tell other people what the reality is. There was chaos, there was destruction, there are hopes, fake promises, but end of the day, nothing remained. Ending with something satirical in Nepali, but again, all languages are not the same. What you want to say in one language could totally be different in another language. So that is why I dropped that satirical ending and went on with that tragic tone too.
I would say that it's perhaps not so much the languages as it is the people who speak them. So, a satire in English or in Polish or in Russian may have a much deeper, much more profound and a far-reaching impact on people reading a humorous work rather than tragedy. And in some other languages, some other cultures, the audience will react perhaps more strongly to something that is presented in tragic terms. I was asking about it simply because I personally find humor not just illuminating, but also liberating. But I mean, the book is definitely makes a strong impact on the reader because it talks about very serious things, and that loss of hope that was part of the context that you were describing. I want to ask you also about a couple of things in the book itself, because I have marked a couple of places. You decided to write it in English. And for an English language reader, I found myself having to Google different things, different events. And so do you not think that it would have, if you were to edit it or publish it again, another edition or whatever, would you consider adding footnotes, for example, for a reader who's not as familiar with Nepal's history as you are?
Absolutely. So going back to what you said, the book was initially written in Nepali. It was initially meant for the people in Nepal who don't know much about the revolution. They think the revolution just caused tragedy and violence, but they don't know what exactly happened. And then when I read it in Nepali, I did not quite like it. And then as an author, you cannot just let anything that you don't like get in the public, right? So I thought I'd write it in English. I showed it to a couple of people. They said, yeah, it's fine. And then I thought I'd printed it. And the book was never meant for people outside Nepal. The book was always meant for people who were inside Nepal, but they did not know about the war. Yes, writing it in English reduced my audience in Nepal, But now look at this. I have audience from Poland. I have audience from United States. I have audience from Greece. So
Yes.
why not?
Yeah. No, it is absolutely wonderful. But like I said, one of my comments would be perhaps to add footnotes,
Absolutely.
because the context is so interesting and so complex. I didn't know what the panchayat system was. I didn't know much about the king's rule, how it ended, how it changed, what happened. I didn't know about the influence of historical caste system on the social setup, contemporary social setup, etc. So that would be very.
So it was assumed that the audience would only be from Nepal. And when I wrote this book, I never knew that I'd even apply to Georgetown, let alone coming to Georgetown. Right? I never thought that I'd bring this book outside Nepal. I never thought my audience would be this big. So it's like I assumed that the people who read my book were from Nepal and knew just a bit about everything, if not much. And that is why I did not add any footnotes or any notes for people who did not know a lot of concepts, even the word like Ba and Ama, which means father and mother. So if I happen to write a second edition, I will definitely, make improvements to a lot of things. But the most important thing I will do is add footnotes.
That would be very helpful, because it would also clarify some of the details of the context, historical and social context of Nepal. So you'll be distributing the copies to people.
Yeah.
You should, because it's a book worth reading, definitely. I want to go back to a couple of themes that run through the book. At least that's how I understood some of them. So one of those themes that really seemed to be very significant was the theme of education, and that kind of upward mobility, or the desire to go beyond, your own background for the main character. And there is a wonderful excerpt on page 20 in the book. You talk about Dilip's father, who noticed the same things. He had been content in his world, but now watching us, he seemed to think we had a purpose that he could never quite grasp. And so in the end, they agreed to send us to school, not because they believed in education or because they knew what was ahead, but because they were starting to believe that we might just be able to do something different with our lives. I think it's a wonderful line. Do you think that way of thinking about education is more inspirational, more motivational than seeing it in purely pragmatic terms as a kind of vocational training for a future job?
I never thought of it that way. Well, again, like I said, it's the reality that used to happen in villages, right? So the people in villages of Rolpa district, Rukum district, they did not have that much of education. So we're talking about people who were born in the 50s or even before that. The fathers that we're talking about are the people who were born in the 1950s or even before that. So these people never actually got the opportunities to do these things. All their fathers had been farmers, right? Their forefathers had been farmers. They had been farming all their life. So these people did not know anything. The best they could do was count money, nothing else. So it is the reality that was, and maybe in some places there still is. So it is what the fathers who were born in the 1940s, 50s, who did not get any opportunity at all, who did not even know that there was a world that existed outside their villages. It is what those fathers thought, what these people used to think education could do, or what they thought about education. It's in a way that the people who never got opportunities, who never knew what a school looked like, think.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about change as much as anything else, and change is always painful to some extent. And I wonder, even your references here in the book to the fact that the panchayat system collapsed, you say, the single voice that had dictated every corner of the country for decades was no longer absolute. Everything changed. When everything changes in such a dramatic way, don't you think that there's chaos that follows it? And maybe these protests and civil wars were also part of that chaos, when people didn't know what to hang on to. Because the previous generations, as you said, didn't even know, perhaps in some cases, what the school looked like. Never mind what was out there beyond Nepal. And for you, the entire world is open. You're here at Georgetown in Qatar.
Well, so when I see the previous generation, I see the previous generation of villages like Lungri, of the villages that were underdeveloped. The people who were in places where they had access, they knew about these things. They knew about the capture of power by the king in 1960. They knew about the rigged election in 1980, if I'm not wrong. They knew what was going on, but we're again talking about the people in small villages where the only person who knows what is going on or what actually is happening are the only people who know actually what is happening are people like Somraj Bazi, the Pradhan Panchaks, and the people who follow him closely. So not many people knew about it. In a village of 1,000 people, hardly 1 or 2% knew about the chaos. All he knew was that his god, his king, was no longer absolute, and he was nothing after that. So we're not talking about the entire country. We're talking about the places where there was no access of a lot of things.
But also, to be kind of devil's advocate here, I would say for all those generations before that didn't know much about the world outside, didn't know anything, they didn't even consider change. Yeah, they stuck to what they knew, and it gave them a certain sense of stability and comfort. And now people have learned what lies beyond these confines of their villages. As you say here, this village is too small for you, Rolpa is too small for you, the world is big, Jetha. And you, he placed a rough, calloused hand on my shoulder. You were born to see it. That's the father of the main character. And the father is encouraging his young son to go out there and perhaps in the long run rebel against the pre-existing system. So there's a question about education. Do you see yourself in 10, 20, 30 years? Will you go back to Nepal to change it?
Well, my old man inspires me a lot. So he went to Kathmandu a few years ago for a few years to do his PhD. He could have stayed in Kathmandu because Kathmandu had a lot of opportunities, right? There are hardly... he's the first from my district to do PhD in physics. He would get a lot of opportunities in Kathmandu, but he said, I'll go back to the same place that has given me everything, and I'll teach those children, I'll inspire these children. So my old man inspires me as well. So what I aim to do is I aim to learn about the world and then go back to that same place I came from and teach those kids, right? Teach the younger version of myself that I believe I'll see in other people in, let's say, 10 years, 15 years, and then I'll tell them what the world looks like. I'll tell them what they are meant to do. I'll advise them rather. I'll suggest them what they can do. I'll just share my knowledge with them and gain knowledge from them. So that is what I intend to do, thanks to my old man.
So you were thinking of becoming a teacher?
Well, a student or rebel who wants justice also feels a lot about politics. I believe I'll go to that very place around those little children, or let's say around those 16, 17-year-olds, high school students who are somewhere between that student and rebel range. And I think that is what I would love to do.
Well, this is a very noble intention, and I hope it stays with you. I wanted to go back to the context and background of whatever is happening in Nepal even now. I just wanted to ask you if you see any connections between what you have termed a revolution, and as I said, this is a very loaded term which brings hope for very profound change. But is there any connection between this revolution and previous protests, wars, conflicts? Have people always wanted the same and tried to get there through different means, different ideologies, or is it qualitatively different from any previous protest?
Well, people have always wanted justice, right? People have always wanted a fair system. But what I believe is different in this revolution is that it is not just a revolution against suppression, oppression. 1950, it was a revolution against the autocratic rule. 1980, it was a revolution against the panchayat system. 1990 as well, it was against the panchayat system. And then 2006 was against the monarch who had vested the entire power into himself, even though the constitution said that he had no right to do that. So this is more of a thing against corruption. This tells, what I get from this is that people have started to wake up. People have started to open their eyes and see the world, because my old man and the other people in the past, all of people, they fought or they revolted against oppression, against injustice, but they never revolted against corruption. Even though they knew it was happening, they never revolted against nepotism. So what we did was we revolted against all of these things. And I mean, let's see how it goes. There is a connection because all these things are interconnected with each other. But again, this is more of a thing against, this is more of a revolution against corruption and to change the entire mindset, the mindset of the whole nation. Like I said, back 20 years ago, had we done this podcast, I'd never have said, let's stop these people to the ground. Let's put them to their places. I'd never have said that. But now, because we've started to open our eyes, because we've started to realize that our politics is in gutters, entire system is in gutters, now I think it is different in that way. But again, all these things are interconnected as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said they are interconnected, because they are. I can see nepotism and corruption being very closely connected. How does oppression come into it?
Well, oppression, not right now, I'd say. I mean, even now, there was some form of oppression. For example, yeah, there was a bit of oppression because just 2 to 3 weeks before the revolution, the government decided to, well, it starts from May itself, I think. In May, there was a bill that was being argued on, where there was this bill on social media that whether people are allowed to criticize about, it was just outrageous. I mean, it even had points that said people will not be allowed to criticize the prime minister or make memes, jokes of them online. So it was not passed at that time. And again, in September or late of August, there was this thing where they banned all the social medias. It is a huge form of oppression in today's age that you try to control social media, that you try to control television or media.
Well, it's probably a form of censorship from that point of view. I suppose, preventing people
from speaking, people from speaking against the rule.
The September protests, you're saying, were mainly about corruption and people rebelling against corruption, simply because it got to the point that it was so disruptive to public life.
Yeah.
That it became unsustainable. Well, but, corruption doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's caused by something. What caused this level, this depth of corruption in Nepal?
Well, because we've never truly fought against it, maybe. We've never truly fought against corruption. We've fought against oppression in the past. We've fought against autocracy in the past, but we've not really fought against corruption. There's never been a fight against corruption, even though we know things are not right. Even though we know that in the government sector there are a lot of things that are wrong, we have never really fought against it.
You see, addressing corruption is like addressing symptoms. Because corruption comes from something. It comes, obviously, you said you've never addressed it before, etc. So it has been ingrained in Nepal's public life for quite a while, but something causes it. What do you think causes corruption? Because corruption is not just characteristic of Nepal. It takes place in many, many, many other countries. What are the root causes of corruption, would you say? And is it possible to address these causes as a result of this revolution? Is this revolution or the leaders, and I don't know to what extent they are unified in their thinking, whether they are addressing these root causes or whether the opposition is actually fragmented and it was just a spontaneous protest with no follow-up?
Well, what causes corruption? That is a really deep question, first of all. Well, when corruption is like in such a huge, Nepal stands, I think, 120, 130th in the corruption index. So when it tells you that the state is that poor, I think it goes directly to the intent of the people in power.
Right, so it's poverty more than anything else, would you say? That makes people more vulnerable to corruption, more prone to committing acts of corruption?
Well, I think it revolves around the same concept of if people are not going to do it. It's first of all, it starts with nepotism.
Okay.
When you become a prime minister, a person from your party will become the head of embassy in one country, right? First of all, it comes with nepotism. When people don't make a noise, like people don't tend to, if it's in a small scale, people don't tend to care a lot about nepotism. I mean, I think it starts with the embassy thing, and then it goes on. So the root cause is people not speaking. Like, end of the day, if people are passive, they're gonna do what the people in office are gonna do what they want to do, and then it goes and goes and goes on, and
so
it explodes all of a sudden.
Right. So you would think that the responsibility for fighting corruption, perhaps at the end of the day, rests with individuals. So that would remind me of one of last broadcasts by George Orwell, in which he said that in an authoritarian or totalitarian system, the ultimate responsibility rests with individuals to fight it, because you can't fight it in an organized way. So by either refusing to take part in certain practices or some other ways, it should be up to individual people to maintain the ethical standards and their own moral position. Would you agree with this? Is this what you're thinking?
More or less, yes. I don't know if I agree with that 100%, but I revolve around that orbit,
Yeah. Okay, because, at the end of the day, if people just erupt from time to time when they are frustrated, pushed to the extreme, angry, disappointed, then those protests won't really bring any lasting change, will they?
No, they will not. It depends. It is totally up to the people, because people, I mean, I'll not even say people, I'll say Gen Z, because
your generation.
Yeah, my generation, because the old people, they did not care that much, or they lost hope, or maybe they had that emotional aspect, because for people like my father, they got voices from these parties. They were not allowed to voice their opinions. They were not allowed to say anything. So they were actually taken in by such parties, people who wanted to do something, wanted to protest, but were afraid. They were actually given a refugee by these parties. So, I mean, we cannot even blame them, because that was the state of oppression as well. And in that state of oppression, someone gives you voice. If someone treats you that well, maybe due to the emotional aspect, you don't say a lot of things as well. But again, it's the Gen Z who came to the streets. They could have decided to stay at their homes. They could have decided not to do anything. They could have decided not to care. A total of 25 people would have showed up. They would have gotten hungry, and they would have returned to their houses. But again, in all the 77 districts, people came to the streets and people revolted. That is individual decision, end of the day.
Yes. Yeah, it's obviously supported by the fact that others are out there protesting as well. So it's a lot easier to be part of a crowd, even though you're facing, in effect, mortal danger, because you can be shot dead by the army or the police, yeah? The only thing is that obviously this famous or infamous Gen Z, if we use this collective term, is composed of very young people, in their 20s. So how realistic is your hope that you said you had for this particular revolution that it will succeed? Not only are they very young, but also they are fragmented. Do they actually have any plan for the future, any idea how to address this endemic corruption, the nepotism, how to get rid of poverty, which is probably driving a lot of these issues within the society, the inequality? Is there a plan? I mean, I'm speaking to you as a representative of Nepalese Gen Z. And if there is a plan, what might it be? Or what plan would you suggest?
Well, first of all, it's the people who did the protest were majorly Gen Zs. The people who came to the streets were Gen Zs. But again, we're trusting people with experience for politics as well. We have people who we trust as well. We have some old people, some 40-year-olds, some 50-year-olds who we trust, some 35-year-olds, or even some Gen Zs. So it's not, even though the protest was done by Gen Zs, even though the revolution was primarily done by the Gen Zs, the people who are entrusting with power are the people who we believe, or who we are made to believe that are honest, experienced, and will do something. So it's not just the Gen Zs who will be in politics. Matter of fact, there will not even be that many Gen Zs in the parliament. It will be with the support of Gen Zs in the nation, but with the people that the Gen Zs made to believe. I'll not say Gen Z believes. Gen Zs made to believe are the people who will change the nation. Again,
right.
Made to believe.
So you've done your bit of the kind of dirty work by going out into the streets and disposing of the old regime, and now you have allowed this new set of people to come in, and you trust them. And
we are made to believe that we should trust them, and we are made to believe that we trust them.
But it's not the same. It's not the same. So if you're phrasing it in this way.
I am phrasing it in this way.
So then it puts a bit of a twist on your hope for the future. Yeah. So that hope is...
Again, if we learn to critique, if we learn to tell what's wrong and what's right, if we learn to question them, if we learn to put them to their places, I'm using the term to put them to their places. If we learn to show them their place, then I think it will succeed. It is a bit rebellious coming from me, this statement, put them in their place. But again, we don't praise a teacher for teaching students. Why do we need to applaud these people? It is their job. Sit down, do your job. If you don't do your job, then you'll see what happens.
Well, because their jobs concern power, unlike other jobs, perhaps. To some degree, you can argue that some other jobs also have some kind of participation in some kind of power, yeah? But here you have naked political power, which actually makes you very important if you're a politician. It also gives you control over other people's lives. So it's a very complex topic, but I think what you are calling for is accountability.
Accountability, that is the word.
And I think that does indeed give hope. If people learn this word, if people learn what it means, and if people demand it from their politicians, then I think perhaps I can agree with you that there is hope. Yeah, so I think with this hopeful note, I can probably say thank you for this very interesting and illuminating conversation.
Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure, as always. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of GQ Speaks. We hope you've gained valuable insights and inspirations from our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to follow us on our Instagram page at GQ_speaks, and be sure to leave a review on Spotify to show your support.